The Good Reading Podcast is brought to you by Luxury-Read, the monthly book subscription that pairs a new release book with a pampering gift delivered to your door. There are new books every month and 9 genres to choose from. Why not spoil yourself or give the gift of a Luxury-Read subscription today? Visit luxury.com.au to find out how.
The community forest that foamed along the back fence was still and deep. Some days, the trees there looked hemmed in by the neighbourhood. Other days, like today, it seemed like they were bursting outward, forcing back the fences and the lawns and the houses to make way. A lot of kids Tracy's age used Wild Place as a shortcut. There was a concrete laneway on Novak Street where the 781 bus stopped. Cutting through the bush rather than walking all the way around would shave off precious minutes. If Tracy had run away, there was a good chance she'd gone that way. If someone snatched her, they'd probably have used the bushland to their advantage too. Had that place been properly searched? Tom was a naturally restless person. Connie had the incredible ability to just be. The kids did too, from what he could tell. But Tom's mind was always buzzing. Maybe Kieran was right. Maybe he needed to see a professional. Or maybe he was just a realist. After all, life and happiness, all that good stuff, didn't stick around forever. Everything was temporary. Tom was always watching for the canary in the coal mine. Then again, wasn't that what fathers were supposed to do? He checked his watch. The day was still young. It wouldn't hurt to go and take a look around Wild Place. He'd be back in time to fix a tap before Connie got home. Maybe he'd find a clue. Maybe he'd find a body.
Hello and welcome to the Good Reading Podcast. Christian White is an author, screenwriter and producer. His debut novel, The Nowhere Child, won the 2017 Wheeler Centre Victorian Premier's Literary Award. His second novel, The Wife and the Widow, became an instant bestseller and was shortlisted for the 2020 Indie Book Awards for Best Fiction. Christian has also written for the screen, including the television series Clickbait and the feature film Relic, which premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival and was nominated for Best Feature Film at the Australian Writers Guild Awards. But today I'm talking to Christian about his latest novel, Wild Place. Christian, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Your writing suggests you have a fondness for suburbia. This Keele Street, Camp Hill, seems to be peaceful enough. But since we seem to be living in the age of bubbles, I wondered, is Camp Hill a perfect bubble, a snow globe of existence, as I think you're right, or just a perfect setting for a terrible crime?
There's something to me very, very creepy, I guess, about suburbia and about this sort of artificial kind of atmosphere in suburbia where everyone's nice and everyone's going about their business and everyone is sort of living their little lives. But like everywhere and like everyone, there's, the old cliche about the onion has layers. I think suburbia has layers and layers and layers, and because it's populated by people at the end of the day. I mean, there's something about this artificial safety that I find really, really intriguing. And for me, when I think about suburbia, I think about, my childhood, growing up as a teenager, living on the Mornington Peninsula in the suburbs, which is, Wild Place is set in Camp Hill, which is a fictional place, but it's very much drawn from Mornington, Mount Martha, all these places I grew up as a kid. So I think that when I think about being a kid, I feel this sort of things like stranger danger and all of those sort of things sort of all go into the blender. There's something about just ordinary places that creep me out. I like stories about serial killers, of course, like everyone, but there's something about an evil monster getting innocent people that is sort of boring in a weird sort of way. And to me, what's always been more interesting are these ordinary characters, these people you walk past that might do something horrible for reasons you might not agree with, but you can almost empathize with. I've got a mild obsession with the idea of suburbia and how it's just plain creepy.
I actually think I share that obsession, and it just made me think about the suburb I live in. We think we know everybody, but we don't really know everybody.
You live in close proximity with all these people that you don't really, everyone's got their little secrets. And when you're a crime writer and a crime reader, you see the world through this filter. If any of my neighbors listen to this, I apologize, but I'm sort of suspicious about everyone. And, you can watch your neighbor's house and get a really good sense of their routine and who they are. But then when your brain starts to wander like me, you think, oh, what else are they up to? I remember growing up as a kid, our next door neighbor, we called her Mean Jean, even though she was really nice. Her name just happened to be Jean. But her husband, his name escapes me now, they had a big work shed in the back, and this husband was in the work shed. I mean, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and there was just all this clanging, and it was very easy to think, what the hell is he doing in there? Is he building some sort of death machine? Is he is he a serial killer? And that's sort of where my brain goes. So I think a lot of people are like that. There's something about looking over your neighbor's fence and wondering what are their secrets. I'm sounding like the creep now, really.
All perfectly normal. Wild Place is set in 1989 and on the eve of the 90s, and it's littered with a whole string of cultural references. The Sega Master System, that's something I haven't heard for a while. A Streets Viennetta cut into large slices. Parachute Pants, Ghostbusters, Motley Crue. What's your relationship with the 80s?
I was born in 81, so I was sort of, still very young. But my memories of childhood are all around late 80s, early 90s. So, I think it's how certain decades are romanticized by certain generations. I think that the 50s were sort of romanticized by a certain generation for a long time. And I think now we're seeing that happen with the 80s. I think, things like Stranger Things and all of these this content coming out that romanticizes the 80s. And for good or bad, it was a time for me when, way before internet, before mobile phones, you would just go out and as a kid and just go and hang out with your friends, have no contact with you, but as long as you were back by a certain time, then no one would even notice. But there was also stitched into that memory for me of the 80s is, I remember Mum telling me, I'm sure they weren't true, these stories, but she thought they were true. She would have heard a story from a friend of a friend about, a kid that got kidnapped from here. And so there was those sort of things as well. You can go out and be free and wild, but you've got to be careful of strangers. So there was this sort of danger to that time as well. It was an innocent time and it was in a dangerous time, but in the late 80s and early 90s, sort of mass hysteria spread throughout the world, America specifically, but it came to Australia and the UK as well, where all of a sudden everyone was scared of the Satanists and satanic cults, and they were worried that kids were getting brainwashed through heavy metal music and all of that sort of stuff. So that's really, really interesting to me. And but over the last 2 years, we've seen conspiracy theories gone wild, with people worried about the COVID vaccine and even before that, QAnon and people saying Hillary Clinton is drinking children's blood and all of these insane things. I was kind of tied up with all that and obsessed with that. And I was trying to figure out, why do people believe these things? What's going on there? And I knew I wanted to sort of write about that, but it wasn't until I realized, what we're experiencing now is just an evolution of satanic panic back in the day, where there's this sort of, people are scared, so their standards of evidence drop, so you do start believing, well, maybe Satanists are trying to kill my kid, so it was sort of a way of exploring all of that. I wanted to set up this really idyllic world, and then in the center of that, put Tom, this school teacher who's really just got too much time on his hands and sort of taps into that paranoia, which I think so many people are doing now. And I sort of wanted to explore that, but within this, like you say, this safe little bubble of a place and a time.
Well, that actually brings me to Tom Witter, the character. Tom is quite a conflicted character. He teaches at a Christian school, but he's questioning his religion. He lives in suburbia, but he's very aware of its shortcomings, and he's dealing with some bad memories from his own school days. He drives a Sigma. I haven't heard that for a while. And he encounters an old school flame, Detective Sharon Guthrie, in the process of investigating this crime, the disappearance of Tracy Reed. And he's also facing the challenges of parenthood. He's a very real and complex character. What are his origins?
Firstly, I wanted to write a male protagonist because the protagonists in both my previous books were female. So I wanted to kind of mix it up a bit. And then I just wanted him to be utterly average, and I wanted him to be the typical, middle-aged suburbanite. And then making him a teacher was partly, I wanted him to have a pre-existing connection to Tracy when she goes missing. So he taught her for a year. So he knows her. She's a local girl and he's taught her. So I want him to have a loose connection there. But my mum was a school teacher and my sister's a school teacher. So I try to draw on as much of what I know as well. And then really what I did is I took parts of both my parents and kind of merged them into this character who's kind of goofy and dorky and I don't know, so just likable and safe. And the whole question of the book was, why do good people do bad things? And early on, I'll often have a word or a question or a phrase that I'll put on a post-it and stick up somewhere near my desk. And whenever I'm sort of feeling a bit stagnant, I always go back to it and so think, what is this story about? And that's really helpful. So I came up with that really early on. So I wanted just this kind of outwardly, you just think he's a normal, good guy. And I knew I wanted to push him to some very, without going into spoilers, I wanted to push him to some really dark places. And I think, honestly, I put a bit of myself in there. For the first time ever, I think there's three male characters in this book. There's a teenager called Kieran, another teenager, he's Tom's son, another teenager who's a bit older, Sean, who is kind of the neighborhood goth who Tom comes to suspect. And then there's Tom, this middle-aged dude. And I think that for all three of those, I drew on parts of myself more than any other book, actually. So there's a little bit of me, quite a lot of me in Tom as well, I think, just this sort of, because in some ways I'm just a boring, dorky guy. And I think that's what I wanted to tap into.
There's another thing that I feel is almost like a character, and that is the wild place. And the wild place is this strip of bushland behind these rows of houses. And it's almost like a menacing character, like an evil presence, as much a character as the people there. Was that the case? Did this story grow out of wild place?
Yeah, really, really early on, I had this very strong idea about wild place. And so the way it's set up in the book, there's this community forest, there's this big patch of really dense bushland hemmed in by houses and hemmed in by a neighborhood, so there's some sort of tension there already between this safe, structured nature of suburbia compared to this wild little patch of land, buzzing with wildlife. But that was also based on a few things from my childhood. At the end of my street, growing up, we had an empty paddock, and in that empty paddock, there was this one corner of that was just thick bushland. It was just one corner, really, really small, but there was something so scary. Every time I walked past it, I would think, who's in there? What's happening? And of course, because it's suburbia, there's all these urban legends about it. And my brother told me that there was a murderer who lived in there who dressed as a clown and came out and cut kids up. So all of that sort of stuff was there. And then as an adult, my mother-in-law lives in a place called Mount Eliza, and right across the street from her house, there's what's called the secret passage. And it's very similar to Wild Place. It cuts between these two houses, and then there's this huge interior lot. There's trees in there, but it's much more open. But there was something, I don't know, there's just something about those places that there's all these legends associated with that. And there's just an inherent, I think we're all inherently scared of forests. All the best fairy tales are all about dark forests, and there's something really scary about that. And I really wanted that to sort of represent Tom's paranoia. Like, even though he's in this really safe spot, there's this little wild stone that he can't get past. He's just paranoid. He's always waiting. And I really like the idea of something like that being appealing when you move in, and then it's right behind your house, this forest. And it's beautiful, but then you spend your first night at the house, and then it's dark, and then suddenly it's spooky, and then suddenly you think, what's in there? And did we do the right thing by moving here? And there's something about that I really responded to very, very early. It was usually how my ideas form is I'll get a hook really early on, and sort of a theme or an idea, so it was I knew it was going to be about Satanic Panic and a neighborhood watch. I knew it had something to do with neighborhood watch. I didn't know what that was, but along with those two things was this wild place. It didn't have a name then, but it was this community forest that I was going to use somehow. I didn't know how, but
that wild place really, for me, gave this book a sense not of crime fiction, but of a mystery rather than simply a crime, which makes it much more unpredictable and less, I guess, generic. I'm not sure if that's a good description or not. That sense of mystery that leads me on to my final question, which is, it's one of the books where I want to tell all the readers kind of what happens, but in a sense, I can't tell them what happens because there's a lot of unanswered questions in Wild Place. It doesn't fully resolve. So I want to ask you, what's the deal with leaving the reader hanging like that?
The ending is ambiguous, and I think that it ties up a certain amount, but it leaves one question, and there are clues to the answer to that question, but it is left ambiguous. Actually, early on, it had a very different ending. It had quite a neat ending. And then somewhere along the way, I wanted to just to kind of play with that. And there's an epilogue that turns that ambiguous ending into a less ambiguous ending. It still doesn't tie everything up, but it really gives you a clue as to the true answer. And I went back and forth about whether I wanted to include that, and that epilogue. And ultimately, I did because I wanted to give the reader enough. Some of my favorite finales in TV shows are those ambiguous ones. So, slight spoilers for Sopranos and Mad Men, but they both end with this really ambiguous ending that at first you can read it and think, oh, that's a bit annoying, but then you think about it and all the answers are there and all the clues are there, and it's something really satisfying.
Well, for me, one of the marks of a good book is that thing where some of it's left up to the reader's imagination. It's not all tied down, and that's something I really enjoyed about this book, Christian. So thank you for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely, been a blast.
I've been talking to Christian White about his latest book, Wild Place. It's published by Affirm Press and is available at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. This Good Reading Podcast was brought to you by Luxury. Why not spoil yourself or give the gift of a Luxury subscription today? Visit luxury.com.au to find out how.